Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy. Welcome to another episode. This one we are actually going live at we are live now at 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, May 6th. If you're in the state of Ohio, as a quick note, you should be going out to look for and get one of these. I stuck it onto the back of my phone because it kept coming off of my sport coat lapel this morning. I went and voted. And if you're voting in the state of Ohio, I strongly encourage a no vote on issue two. It is not a bond fund. It's being misrepresented as a bond fund. It is a slush fund for the folks in Columbus, Ohio. We don't want that. Vote no on issue two. Also, an Ohio note. About a half hour from now, we'll be going live on X Spaces, and we'll be talking about precinct strategy. Look for, I almost said precinct strategy with Dan Schultz, but actually, Dan Schultz is otherwise occupied today, and I'll be hosting. So look for me on X Spaces. I'll be talking about precinct strategy at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And in case you don't know, Dan Schultz and I do that twice a week, Tuesday afternoons, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and Friday evenings at 9 p.m. Hop on, join us. It is a civics conversation that's been sorely lacking in the United States, really for about 60 years. It's ridiculous. We, and I include myself in this, a couple of years ago, I didn't know what precincts were and these chairs that are empty and all that stuff. Join us for this conversation. If you are Make America Great Again, America First type, if you're concerned about we the people not having a voice in our representative government, come join us at Precinct Strategy. That's a website also. Created and founded by Dan Schultz, my host. I'm typically the co-host. Today, as I said, I'll be hosting. Dan runs the website, does the podcast, and literally wrote the book on it. But that's actually not what we're here to talk about. I have reconnected with a friend of mine. He is a judge from some years ago. We kind of fell out of touch, and I stumbled onto something in one of his posts that really got my attention, and I was like, it just lit the fire. I had to hop on and do this live stream. This is from an organization called constitutioncenter.org. Constitution, as in the thing that many, many people give lip service to and ignore in our country, we need to bring back. I don't have my hat with me, but if you've ever seen my social media profile, you know that I have a black cap with bold white letters on the top that say Make America Constitutional Again. So as soon as I saw this, it caught my attention. And then I'm glad that it did. This article, Remembering the Supreme Court's First Dissenter, it focuses on Supreme Court Justice William Johnson Jr. This is near the beginnings of the Supreme Court in the United States, but the importance of this cannot possibly be overstated. We have a Supreme Court system where, and it's actually, I think it's a well-written article, and it's informative, and it goes through history. It actually does cite some case law and stuff for legal nerds like me who like to read up on those things. But most importantly, it made me think in terms of where we've gotten to and how we've gotten off the rails on many, many different things. And that is this, what I call go along to get along. We see it everywhere. If you've heard me talk about education, by the way, as a side note, I kind of entertained by this. my, my wife discovered a few days ago that I apparently now have an IMDb page because I was featured in a Newsmax documentary called Transforming America. Anyway, if you've heard me speak on education, we know by now, anyone who's clear eyed understands that school boards have gone ridiculously off the rails. They've gone woke. My wife calls them the five eyed monster. School boards rubber stamp all kinds of mayhem and nonsense because it is extremely rare anymore to find anybody with the courage and wherewithal to think for themselves, use logic and reason, and question things that are presented to the board. There's this ridiculous sort of it's a broken collectivist mentality where people on school boards seem to think that their job is simply to show up every once in a while, rubber stamp whatever, say aye to whatever the vote is, and then go home year after year and getting reelected, presumably because of their last name, or people think they smile well or they look pretty or whatever. I have no idea why these people keep getting reelected, but that's common not only on school boards, but in lots of other places. We have people who simply rubber stamp whatever because they don't want to seem like the outlier. And if you're at all curious, you can go on some, whichever streaming service. I'm not a big fan of YouTube, but Rumble, whatever. You can find these research studies that have been done on people and their interest in feeling like they conform. And I'm going to paraphrase a couple of them, but I think they're interesting psychological experiments where they tell people they go in and behave in a certain way and act and pretend, and they defy logic in order to see if people will follow along. And oftentimes people do. People become unthinking when they feel like they're an outlier in a group. So, for instance, if there was one that was done like in a medical waiting room where everybody at a certain sound that would sound off every 15 minutes, everybody stood for no reason for like a minute, and then they sat back down again. And they were all actors except like one or two people who would venture in for medical appointments. And lo and behold, sure enough, they would look around confused the first couple of times, and then they would just start standing for no reason at all, not asking like, "Hey, why do you stand when that bell goes off?" or whatever. That unfortunately is a lot of society. It's a lot of humanity, and we can't survive without the dissenter. We can't survive. I'm going to recommend this article, and it talks specifically about not just this first Supreme Court justice who was known significantly for dissenting, and then some other Supreme Court justices, but it talks about the follow-on impact of that. You have you have people who come along later and read those dissenting opinions and form new ideas, and it impacts following legislation and judicial review, which is really important because if somebody is simply saying no, I mean, that's a good step for a lot of these places, especially school boards, using them as an example. For heaven's sakes, there's so many complex issues with so many different sort of components to them that come through any given school board in any different given community anywhere in the United States over time. You would think that somebody somewhere at some point would ask a question and say, no, I'm actually not in favor of that thing. But it rarely happens in my experience. And I've looked at a lot of school boards in that fight for K through 12 education and a return to academics and education. That's been my volunteer activity of mine for a long time. But it got me to thinking about where we are in finance. If you've watched any of the episodes, and hopefully go back and skim through, watch some of the episodes of UnWoke.Academy, where I talk about the unthinking nature of many people within the world of finance. At first, I really, well, I still do, I liken it to the doctors and medical community who just played along with the COVID narrative. There were all these protocols that were put in place, and everybody was told that everybody needed to have the jab. And there were many doctors, most of them, who just said, okay, sure, if that's what I'm told to do from corporate, I'm not going to challenge that. I'm not going to ask questions. And that's ridiculous. That is not at all what doctors go through medical school for. This whole top down, tyrannical, protocol driven way of conducting oneself professionally is thoroughly unacceptable in any environment. Teachers need to be challenging what's given to them by the administrators. Doctors need to be challenging what's told to them by the administrators of hospitals, especially when you have clearly, in my book, manipulated environments that are politicized. I think that's the word I want, politicized. And we have undue influence from outside entities. Like in healthcare, it's big pharma. Big pharma influences clearly the administration of mega hospitals, and they do it for engineered profit. At some point, it's up to the doctor. They find that's the last stop. That's the stopgap. That's the fail safe that is there. It must be there. That person must be there to protect the interests of the individual, you, the consumer, and your health interests. When it comes to education, we have teachers. And if teachers are given garbage that is clearly not in line with their profession, the class that is supposed to be taught, or in line with anybody's reasonable moral value system, like pornographic material or this race baiting garbage or anti Semitism, anti West, anti American, all of that stuff, at some point, it's up to somebody, and hopefully a lot of somebody's, to start dissenting. We must. We must do it. Even if you're a standout, even if you're alone, it's not a fun place to be. I can tell you from personal experience, but somebody has to stand up to that and say, no, that's not right. In my world, what that means is forever. There has been a very clear, defined way that we conduct financial due diligence and analysis of investment alternatives. We've done it the same way forever until about 2020, when all of a sudden it changed dramatically. And as a result of that, virtually all money, or most money, all ended up in a very small pool of investments that happened to be mega globalist companies that all had these labels on them, and nobody could define the labels. The labels being ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and things like it. So as people ask questions like me, like, what does that mean? How are you defining diversity, equity, and inclusion? Isn't that just virtue signaling and a fake label that you can't actually define? I spent 4 years, at least, maybe more, trying to get somebody to define any of that. Actually, it goes back to 2015, so I'm in year 9 of working on trying to get definitions for those things. If they're not defined, and again, just to make it clear, I'm going to use the analogy of the shots, the jabs that were given during COVID. There are plenty of people who tried to delve into the actual ingredients, and they were scoffed. They were ridiculed to no end on social media, um, for trying to figure out the value of the. Sorry, I thought I'd put this on mute. I will do so now so that this stops buzzing at me. Um, the people who were trying to drill down and get to the heart of the ingredients, and then there were all sorts of questions about how the mRNA was developed and in what labs and where, and are there different batches that were used for different parts of the world? So as people tried to research that, and it should have been the job of the doctors at some point. I mean, not the initial job of the doctors, but the doctors should have been able to and capable of challenging those things and questioning them and asking, at the end of the road, at the end of this track, there are doctors who are actually filling the vials, or medical assistants, sometimes nurses, who are filling the syringe and injecting that into somebody, and often lots of different somebodies. We got into an environment where they were ridiculed, and they were threatened if they even asked questions. Well, that should be an immediate prompt for more questions and more challenges. Some doctors did that, and I have great, great respect for them. Dr. Simone Gold is one. In my book, she stands out as just a spectacular hero of humanity. Her willingness and ability to go out there and form America's frontline doctors. You have many of them. Del Bigtree, Dr. Z, You've got Dr. Robert Malone. You've got a number of great medical staff, people, administrators, nurses, doctors, all across the broad spectrum of healthcare who were able to challenge. They were like that dissenting voice. They were like the dissenter in the Supreme Court. Yes, they stood out and they were often alone, especially early on, but their willingness to go on the record, now that record stands and people like us can go back and point to those and build off of that. That's what's missing in the world of finance. It's frustrating, I'll admit it. It's been years that I've been out here doing this UnWoke.Academy and talking to many thousands of people. I make more phone calls than you can probably imagine to my friends across the board in the world of finance. I've done lunches and coffees and many phone calls. I've done virtual calls asking the questions about what's in it. What are you doing? Why do your investments, Mr. or Mrs. Mutual Fund portfolio manager, that's a term that we use in finance to define the person or team that makes the investment decisions for the mutual fund. I've been asking for years, what is that? How do you define it? What are you doing that's either green or environmentally friendly or leading to better diversification in some way, shape, or form? How do you define an existing lack of diversification? And then what are the metrics you're using to analyze whether or not you're having some sort of presumed beneficial impact? In other words, if you don't define a problem, but say that you're solving it, and then don't define what the steps are or measure something along the way to communicate to the world that you're actually making strides towards solving that problem, then all you have is a lie. And it's a lie. We have been lied to, we've been twisted, manipulated, propagandized by the world of finance, Wall Street overwhelmingly. And I've done the research on this. Go back and watch that episode that I did on Parade of Woke Sameness, where I analyzed many, many different mutual funds and showed that ultimately they have virtually the same series, same small group of investments over and over again, regardless of name and stated intention. That's not okay. That is like the financial equivalent of the jabs during COVID. I'm not okay with that. What I would like to ask you to do, if you work in the world of finance, start asking questions. If you're not already, and start getting more loud about it. I know plenty of people who have said they don't like it, they're not a fan, they're not on board, but they're afraid of losing their job. Could get a lot worse, and it probably will if we don't start asking questions. And I want to put that in a clearer context for you, my fellow colleagues in the world of finance. If you are, I apologize, it must be mail delivery here at my home office studio. If you are out what's in the underlying investments, because if I'm right, go back and go watch that globalist bubble episode that I did. If I'm right, then your client's investments are primed for a nasty drop in the market. We have, I want to put this in brief, clear terms that anybody should be able to understand. My belief with the globalist bubble comments is that a small number of companies are overinvested to a ridiculous degree, that the valuations, the stock price of a small number of companies that virtually everybody is all funneled into are precipitously high in an environment where that artificial fake stock price can't be maintained. That's my belief. That's my position. And I say that I'm not the only one. There are some people that sort of speak quietly in a recent podcast that I did, I mentioned a seminar that I was on, and the presenter made an interesting proposition. The presenter said something along the lines of, if you believe the current valuation of Apple stock, then you believe that everybody pretty much on earth is going to start living in Apple homes, driving Apple cars, streaming Apple services, and using Apple devices like iPhone and watch. Everybody on earth. That's an indication of how arguably overvalued Apple stock prices. And Apple is just one of about 30-ish companies that are overvalued in that way. And so many of us, through IRA, 401k, etc., are put into those. I believe it is a dangerous, dangerous place to be. And I don't see many people challenging that. I've been out in front of this for a couple of years now, being the dissenting voice, and I record these sorts of episodes in the hopes that other people watch them, share the sentiment and comments that I make with your financial advisor, the people in your life who work in the world of finance, and ask them to start asking questions. Get loud. Be the dissenting voice. We need more dissenters. That's what's needed right now. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of UnWoke.Academy with your host, Jonathan Broadbent. Stay tuned for another exciting episode.